Hello horror hounds, welcome back to my A to Z of horror with an entry that begs the question, what is the difference between the living dead and the dying living? And what does it matter when we're all going to end up in the same place, the cemetery? Known in the UK and America as Cemetery Man, D is for Dellamorte, Dellamore. There's no adequate way to completely describe Dellamorte Dellamore. You have to experience it for yourself. Bits of it are a lot like bits of other things, but it is wholly unique. If I tried to give you a recipe to make a movie like this, it would sound like a popcorn movie mixed with an art house flick. You'd start with a little Evil Dead, or probably more something like Peter Jackson's Brain Dead. You'd stir in a sexual muse on a par with Matilda May's vampiric turn in Life Force. You'd marinate it with the philosophical malaise of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, add a dash of Hausu and a pinch of Patrick Bateman's inability to be brought to justice for his crimes in American Psycho. Pepper through with enough uncanny doubling to warm the cockles of David Lynch's heart, combined with hints of a purgatorial, hellish afterlife, much more subtle than you'll find in any of the Hellraiser sequels. And finally, bake it until the art direction has achieved the level of a Terry Gilliam movie. The film's a German, French, Italian production, which might go some way towards explaining some of these disparate aspects that smash together in this kaleidoscopic film. It's directed by an Italian, Michele Soavi, who creates a multi-layered story that can be enjoyed as a zombie splatter film or pored over for meaning as a sort of darkly philosophical tale. It's based on a novel by Tiziano Sclavi, who also, the novel I think is adapting his own comic book, Dylan Dog. But Dellamorte Dellamore is Michele Soavi's fourth film. After almost a decade-long collaboration with Dario Argento that found him working in roles as an actor, as an assistant director, a second unit director with Tenebrae, Phenomena, Opera. He also worked with Lamberto Bava on the Demons films. His directorial debut was with Stage Fright, followed up by The Church and The Sect. In 1988, Soavi worked as assistant director on Terry Gilliam's Italian shot The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, and that is surely where some of the style and look of this film comes from. Look, Michele Soavi has form. He's soaked up everything he's learnt from all of these master directors, and with a CV like his, Stage Fright, The Church, The Sect and Dellamorte Dellamore, it's a CV that makes you wish that this man had directed more films, but we should be thankful for the singular vision that this man has, sort of culminating in this bizarre, joyful, you can see me struggling for adjectives to describe this. I want to try and talk about Dellamorte Dellamore without giving any of it away. I came to it knowing really only the basic setup. Rupert Everett plays Francesco Dellamorte, who works as a cemetery caretaker, and in this particular cemetery, sometimes the recently buried come back to life. They're called returners in this film, and he must make sure he puts them back in the grave. Whilst on paper you might argue that Francesco Dellamorte is cut from similar cloth to Ash Williams from Evil Dead or Reggie Bannister from the Phantasm movies, Dellamorte, and especially how Rupert Everett plays him, has got a much more laconic, bored 9 to 5 approach to this job. It's just part of what he does. It's no great adventure. It's a bit of a pain in the ass, to be perfectly honest. But given that he shuns almost all human contact, it's also a great excuse for him to stay up in the cemetery with the dead and not have to make any real human connections. The only person he spends any real time with and has any real kind of relationship with is a guy called Nagy, his cemetery assistant, who is a sort of, I don't know, Igor type figure, bald, portly, a little slow in the head, but with a childlike enthusiasm that sort of comes with that. Now, Francesco treats him like crap and slowly comes to realise, oh, hang on, actually he's my best friend. And where Francesco is darkly cynical, pretty much nihilistic, Nagy brings a sort of childlike optimism and warmth to the movie that would be sorely lacking without that character. So Francesco's life is pretty much set. He has his routine and he's happy in his glorious isolation within the walls of the cemetery until he sees at a funeral service She, the character only credited as She, played by Anna Falchi. You'll get an idea of the nature of her erotic muse that I mentioned earlier in connection with Life Force from the cover of the DVD case. And she plays multiple characters. She plays three women, or that woman keeps returning. I took it whilst I was watching it the first time as an indicator that Francesco Dellamorte is trapped in a sort of purgatorial world and that this muse will keep returning to him in some form or another. Listening to the commentary track with the writer and director, they did something subtle that I did not pick up on. Anna Falchi is not dubbed in her first incarnation of She, but is dubbed by different women in her second and third incarnations, indicating perhaps that as she is seen, it is a mental projection of Francesco's onto these women. He has this idea of an all-encompassing, all-consuming, sublimating love, which he falls into at first sight many times. In his mind, it's with the same woman who keeps returning, and again that sort of echoes the notion of the returners coming back from the dead. Just because someone leaves doesn't mean they won't come back in some form or another. An awful lot of this movie is completely up for grabs. That will frustrate the hell out of some people. Other people will revel in it. I personally revel in it, as I did for my A entry, Amer, where you are left pretty much to decide entirely for yourself what's going on in this movie. I know from some of the comments for Amer, some people didn't take to that. It was too art housey for them, which is perfectly valid. Dellamore is also an art house movie, but it's a zombie killing splatter gore fest as well. It's much more of a fun 4-pack with friends movie that you can take on that level as well. So if you're worried about some of the darkly poetical philosophical musing aspects I'm talking about it, please understand that is leavened with excellent zombie practical effects, blood squibs everywhere, decapitated heads that are reanimated, nudity, over the top gore, and really, really darkly funny elements. Dellamore made me laugh out loud a lot. Apart from a couple of sets which were built by necessity, the film was shot in 2 separate real-life cemeteries. One was a daytime cemetery and one was a nighttime cemetery. I don't think there is an angle Soavi could have chosen in either of those locations that wouldn't have looked interesting and beautiful, but he wrings every last drop of potential out of his real-life locations. It's almost as if it feels like he could have pointed the camera anywhere and you could have paused the movie and had a print of that. Whatever the frame was focusing on at that point could have made a gorgeous poster. The film looks amazing. The art direction is sublime. The sense of the romantic gothic in this. I mean, for Christ's sake, it's set in a cemetery. This is a horror channel and you're all horror fans, and so I know that you have a sort of sensibility that is drawn to the beauty of these kind of things. Dellamorte Dellamore drips with all the trappings and accoutrements of the grave. It has a gothic sensibility that would have Tim Burton watching it as if it was a porno movie. This is a world that you immerse yourself in. If you appreciate the depths, you can luxuriate in the oddity of the world like a deep, warm bath. But the scenes of atmosphere and artistry are punctuated with action, violence, and zombie dispatching, moving on to spree killing. I mean, it takes strange turns. Believe me, it takes strange turns. I've never seen a film before where the hero decides that he wants the local doctor to cut his penis off, for example. But these humorous action scenes, effects-driven scenes happen with enough frequency that the simple requirements of the gorehound should also be well satisfied. There's also a scene where a recently killed biker roars back out of his grave on his motorcycle like a Meatloaf album cover, literally like the cover of Bat Out of Hell, fused with his motorbike, a little bit like Dan in Nightmare on Elm Street, the Dream Child. There are gently poetic special effects like the will-o'-the-wisps, which are cotton wool balls soaked in a fluid that will give off a blue flame on fishing wires that float around in one of the more romantic scenes. And it's one of those sort of DIY special effects that Italian cinema really excels and revels in. And yeah, you can see the strings, but I like the fact that you can see the strings. To me, that adds to the sense that this is a constructed reality, that notion of a purgatorial place that Francesco is in, not necessarily the real world. Dellamorte Dellamore is thoughtful, it's cynical, it's genuinely laugh out loud funny, it's downright poetic. If you haven't seen it, and you like Evil Dead 2, and you like Brain Dead, and you like Terry Gilliam movies, Jabberwocky, Baron Munchausen, and you want to see a young, laconic, wry Rupert Everett just bestriding this utter madness, don't find out anything more about Dellamorte Dellamore, aka Cemetery Man. Just watch it. Then let it settle in. Ask yourself over the next couple of days, what the fuck did I just see? And then watch it again. So that was my entry for D. This series is completely inspired by Jambo Shango and Randy Mould's own A to Z of horror. I will link to their choice for D in the description field down below. Clearly I loved this movie, and I'm going to leave you as ever with a clue for the next installment, E, and a movie I think it would be safe to say I did not love.